Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
"Are you happy?" the mother-in-law asked while pouring wine. "I will be in a moment," the young woman replied, discreetly switching glasses with her husband and pressing the recorder hidden in her dress pocket. A minute later, there was a dull thud. But before we continue the story, write in the comments what your name is and where you're from. The mother-in-law had asked the question as she poured wine in a thin stream into two identical glasses, which shimmered ruby red in the light of the celebratory candles. The question sounded almost casual, but her voice carried a tense alertness, as if she were probing for something crucial, something that needed immediate confirmation. Magdalena, sitting across from her, turned her head and smiled, though her smile was a little uncertain and veiled 100 secret thoughts. Her eyes briefly darted toward her husband's face, seated beside her. "I will be in a moment," Magdalena said evenly, swapping glasses with her husband in one fluid motion and subtly pressing the button on the recorder hidden in the pocket of her light silk dress. She did it so quickly and naturally that no one noticed the gesture. Her mother-in-law raised an eyebrow but said nothing, and Magdalena's husband, Carlos, simply nodded as he took the new glass. Magdalena knew about the plan. She knew what Carlos and his mother were up to. She had learned of it by chance, and yet it was no less shocking. Confronting them openly would have been foolish and dangerous. She understood that without evidence, it would all come down to word against word. But now, with the recorder quietly running in her dress pocket, she intended to do everything she could to reveal the truth and survive. A tense minute passed. Magdalena kept calm as she watched Carlos raise the glass and take a small sip. The mother-in-law also tasted her wine. Her gaze still pierced Magdalena with a disturbing curiosity. The atmosphere was festive, Carlos's birthday, a dinner party at the family's country house. Yet inside Magdalena, an ominous dread festered. It was hard to believe that people once close, once loved, could so coldly plan her elimination. Suddenly, there was a dull thud, heavy, as if something large had fallen to the floor. All eyes turned to Carlos, who had dropped his glass and was slowly collapsing beside his chair, losing consciousness. Drops of wine stained the pristine tablecloth with blood-red splotches, and sweat trickled down his cheek. The mother-in-law cried out and rushed to him. Magdalena also rose but kept her distance. Despite everything, this was still her husband, and part of her wanted to help. But her thoughts were racing. "He drank the poison wine meant for me." From that moment, a cascade of events began that would completely change Magdalena's fate and unravel the complex web of family relationships. As the mother-in-law knelt beside Carlos, slapping his cheeks and trying to revive him, Magdalena felt a storm rise inside her, a mix of fear, relief, and bitter irony. There was no doubt now, the poison had been in her glass, and her husband had taken the fall. But he was in on it, with his mother, she thought. It was painful and terrifying to accept. And yet, she couldn't stand by and watch him suffer on the floor. "Call an ambulance," Magdalena urged the mother-in-law. But the woman couldn't tear her eyes from her son. "Carlos, my son," she kept repeating, fumbling for her phone with trembling fingers. She genuinely seemed frightened for his life. Did she not expect him to fall into the trap himself? Magdalena wondered, trying to remain calm despite the tremble inside her. Magdalena grabbed her handbag, pulled out her own phone, and started dialing the emergency number, only to see that the mother-in-law was already doing the same. Finally, the woman managed to stammer a few fragmented phrases into the phone. "Come quickly, the address, yes, the country house, my son is unwell." Magdalena stayed close, listening. The mother-in-law was indeed reporting the poisoning. Her voice was panicked, but there was no trace of guilt. Magdalena thought how absurd it all felt, like a scene from a bad crime drama, a sinister conspiracy, the swapped glasses, the victim's fall, but it was real life. Once the call was over, Magdalena glanced at Carlos. He was unconscious, but breathing. His mother had placed a pillow from the couch under his head, repeating, "Hold on, my son, hold on." She clearly didn't understand what had gone wrong, why Carlos was the one who had suffered. Magdalena stepped closer, avoided looking directly at the older woman, and tried to keep her composure. He needs to lie flat so he doesn't choke, she thought, kneeling down to help adjust his position. The mother-in-law didn't argue in this critical moment. Her sole concern seemed to be her son. But Magdalena knew, once Carlos regained consciousness, if he did, the whole dynamic would shift. Voices and footsteps filtered in from outside. It was late, the night had fallen, and other guests were still on the estate, friends of Carlos, smoking on the veranda, strolling through the garden. No one knew what horror had unfolded inside. The cheerful music from the next room suddenly felt eerie and inappropriate. 10 minutes later, the wail of an ambulance sounded at the gates. 2 paramedics came in briskly, asked the mother-in-law about symptoms, and began examining Carlos. One asked, "Did he drink anything?" "What exactly?" "Wine," she answered, her voice shaky. "We were just celebrating." "Could be poor quality alcohol," the second medic guessed while checking his pulse. Magdalena swallowed hard but said nothing. She didn't want to speak her theory aloud, not yet. Too dangerous, too raw. She still hoped the recorder, quietly documenting everything, would hold enough evidence. "We'll take him to the hospital," one medic said. "Will you come with us?" Yes, I'll go," the mother-in-law replied quickly, rising to her feet. Her hair was damp with sweat, her face a mask of genuine horror. Magdalena hesitated. Should she go too? Or stay and think things through? But the mother-in-law didn't even look at her. Her world had shrunk to just her son. Magdalena decided to stay. First, she needed to assess the scene, preserve any evidence. Second, she wanted a break from the older woman's accusatory stares and questions. So when the ambulance pulled away with Carlos and his mother, Magdalena remained alone in the living room. Guests began returning from outside, 2 of Carlos's friends, a college buddy Alejandro and his wife. They were shocked. What happened? Did Carlos faint? Magdalena, exhausted, forced herself to offer a vague explanation. "I'm not sure, maybe the alcohol, maybe a blood pressure spike." The doctors decided to take him in. She hated lying, but telling the full truth would have been worse. Who would believe that Carlos and his mother had plotted to poison her? Looking at the stained tablecloth, the shattered glass, the surreal horror of the moment, Magdalena realized this was just the beginning. It could have ended much worse. She glanced at her phone, the recording light still blinked. The recorder was still running. Carefully, she pulled it out, checked. Yes, it had captured everything, voices, sounds, her own words. I have to be very careful, she thought. Because when Carlos wakes up, if he wakes up soon, our battle will only be starting. She politely asked the guests to leave, explaining, the celebration is over. Carlos is in the hospital. His mother went with him. I'm just very tired. Most understood and left quietly. Only a couple of close friends lingered, but when Magdalena mentioned a headache and confusion, they too left, promising to call later. Once the house was empty, Magdalena shut the front door, turned on the overhead lights, and looked around the living room. She had often visited this country house in her 2 years of marriage. It had always seemed cozy, welcoming. But now it felt sinister. They planned my death here, she thought bitterly. It was one thing to discover infidelity or petty lies. Quite another to learn that your husband and his mother had plotted your murder. For what? An inheritance? The apartment? Or was there some other reason? Stocks, maybe family business shares Carlos didn't want to split with me. Magdalena had never involved herself in his family's financial matters, but she knew large sums were at stake. She picked up a cloth to clean the spilled wine, but froze, staring at the red drops trickling onto the parquet. It looks like blood, she thought, shivering involuntarily. Preserve the evidence, said a voice inside her. She remembered that no police had been called, only the ambulance. The mother-in-law hadn't directly mentioned poisoning. But if Carlos had indeed ingested a toxic substance, the doctors would discover it. Then there would be questions. And the police would get involved. She thought of the recorder again, of what might have been captured before Carlos fell. Carefully retrieving it, she kissed the device like a lucky charm. Maybe this holds enough, she thought. But she was afraid to listen to it alone, afraid she'd miss something important. Still, one thing was already clear. It had never been about love. Even months before this night, Magdalena had begun to notice something strange in her mother-in-law's attitude toward her. She had grown cold, sarcastic, and increasingly nitpicky about every little thing. Carlos, meanwhile, sometimes sided with his mother during arguments, or worse, would simply leave the room when Magdalena tried to talk to him. Gradually, Magdalena began to feel like she was alone in a house ruled by someone else's authority. Sitting down on the couch, staring into space, Magdalena tried to comprehend the journey ahead, from this moment to a place of safety and clarity. She might have to give statements to the police, fight for her life, maybe even hire a lawyer. But just the thought of her husband's betrayal brought a lump to her throat. She remembered how she had once loved him, how tender and attentive he had seemed when they met. He had an intelligent face, a pleasant sense of humor. He gave her flowers, talked with genuine interest about her passions. He had seemed ready to stay by her side forever. She closed her eyes and felt tears form on her lashes, but she wasn't ready to cry openly. No, I must stay strong. I can't let my guard down. If they really tried to get rid of me, this may just be the beginning. What guarantee is there that they won't come up with a plan B, thought Magdalena. Half an hour later, the phone rang sharply. Magdalena jumped, thinking it might be her mother-in-law. The display showed the hospital number. She answered immediately. Hello, Magdalena said, trying to sound confident. Good evening. This is the doctor. Are you Carlos's wife? Came a man's voice. Yes, that's me. How is he? We're running preliminary tests and preparing for gastric lavage. His condition is serious but stable. There are strong signs of poisoning. Can you come to the hospital? Magdalena took a deep breath. She didn't want to stay in this house, now filled with memories of the terrible conspiracy, but going to the hospital, where her mother-in-law would be, scared her too. Still, her resolve was firm. Yes, I'll come as soon as I can. Very well. We're not allowing visitors yet, but you can wait for the results if you'd like. Police officers may want to ask some questions as well, given the circumstances. I understand. Thank you. Magdalena hung up and exhaled shortly. So it was serious. She might have to speak with the authorities directly at the hospital. In some ways, that would be better. She could hand over the recorder or at least mention the existence of evidence. But she kept repeating to herself, I must act carefully, without putting myself in greater danger. She quickly went upstairs to a room where she had left some of her personal things. The air felt fresher there, although her chest was still heavy. She took a small travel bag from the wardrobe and changed out of her party dress into something more comfortable, jeans, a sweater, sneakers. Looking in the mirror, she realized how tired she looked, but still beautiful in her natural way. Dark, neatly styled hair, large expressive eyes that now held both exhaustion and resolve. 22 years ago she'd been a child, then a teenager, a student. Now she was a 32-year-old woman, with 2 years of marriage to a liar, and a criminal. I must survive and seek justice, Magdalena thought. She went back downstairs, turned off all the lights, carefully checked to make sure she hadn't left anything suspicious, and stepped outside. The night was cool. The moon was hidden behind clouds, but there was no rain. Her small blue sedan was parked by the gate. She got into the driver's seat and started the engine. For a few minutes, Magdalena sat still, listening to the nighttime sounds outside the car. She covered her face with her hands, sighed quietly, and whispered to herself, It's going to be okay. She needed to find some inner strength before heading to the hospital. On the way there, Magdalena kept replaying the last few months in her mind, trying to see what she had missed. How didn't I notice that Carlos and his mother were plotting something? Were there signs, clues, small things? Yes, she remembered her mother-in-law offering her certain herbal teas or tinctures that made her feel uneasy, so she refused. Carlos had talked about a large loan they supposedly took together but never explained the details. Her mother-in-law had even asked once, "When are you going to write a will or think about getting life insurance, just in case?" Now everything painted a terrifying picture. Maybe they wanted not just her apartment, but also her savings and her life insurance payout. She was insured for a large amount, required for her job. She remembered Carlos once joking, "If something ever happens to you, I'm the beneficiary." It had sounded like dark humor. She hadn't wanted to think badly of someone she loved. But now she understood, the jokes had ended long ago. Lost in thought, the road flew by. The hospital was a 2-story municipal building in an older style. Magdalena parked in the courtyard and walked inside. At the reception desk, a nurse was on duty. "I'm here to check on my husband, Carlos," Magdalena explained. "Wait a moment. The doctor is busy, but he'll be out soon," the nurse replied, pointing to a corridor lined with hard plastic chairs. Magdalena sat down and listened to the quiet ticking of the wall clock. It was past 2 a.m., and the corridor was almost empty. She felt a chill. Then, from the far end, her mother-in-law appeared. She wore a formal dress with a gray blazer draped over her shoulders. Her hair was disheveled, and her face was grim beyond words. Seeing Magdalena, she stopped and stared, as if seeing her greatest enemy. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. Magdalena forced herself to stay calm. "I'm Carlos's wife. I have every right to know how he's doing, and to be here." Her mother-in-law stepped closer, her face twisted either from pain for her son or from anger that the plan had failed. "You think you're welcome here? You want to watch him die, is that it?" The cruel words made Magdalena flinch, but she refused to show weakness. "Why would you say that? If anyone wanted him dead, it certainly wasn't me," she whispered, keeping her voice low so the staff wouldn't hear. "You don't get to lecture me, girl," the mother-in-law hissed, her voice laced with venom but still quiet. "Don't play the innocent lamb. And who made me the victim in the first place? Wasn't it you?" Her mother-in-law backed off slightly, just as the doctor appeared at the end of the hall, apparently having overheard them. He approached and addressed them firmly but politely. "Please don't argue. This isn't the time for personal drama." The women fell silent. The doctor turned to Magdalena. "Magdalena, I presume?" "Yes." "How is Carlos?" "His condition is serious, but we're doing all we can. We found traces of a toxic substance in his stomach and blood. I'm no chemist, and analysis will be more precise. We've informed the police. That's standard procedure when poisoning is suspected. The authorities will want to question both you and your mother-in-law." Magdalena nodded. Her heart pounded. Everything was moving so fast. "I'm ready to answer any questions," she said, trying to stay composed. "You'll have to wait a bit. Maybe half an hour to an hour. Carlos is still under anesthesia. We've done a gastric lavage." "Thank you, Doctor," Magdalena replied. "May I wait somewhere?" "Yes, you can stay here in the corridor or go to the admissions area." Magdalena sat down again. Her mother-in-law stepped aside toward a window, nervously biting her lip. She occasionally cast contemptuous glances at Magdalena, as if trying to burn her with her stare, as if blaming her for everything. "I wonder what she's going to tell the police," Magdalena thought. "She'll probably try to make me the villain, say I poisoned my own husband. Convenient, isn't it?" But then Magdalena remembered she had the recorder. She didn't know exactly what had been captured, but surely it included the beginning of the conversation, the moment her mother-in-law asked, "Iris Feliz?" and the sound of her pouring the wine. Maybe they hadn't spoken their intentions out loud, but at least the context, the switch of glasses, her own words "I will be," were there. She wanted desperately to listen to the recording, but didn't dare do it here, with so many eyes around. Then a police officer appeared at the end of the hallway. He looked at both women and introduced himself. "Good evening. Inspector Garcia. Who can speak with me about tonight's incident?" I can, the mother-in-law said quickly. I'm the victim's mother. And me too, I'm his wife, Magdalena added, trying to speak calmly. Come with me, the officer said, pointing to a small room at the end of the corridor. All three entered. It was a standard hospital consultation room, with a table and a few chairs. The officer gestured for them to sit. The mother-in-law took a seat near the table. Magdalena sat slightly apart. Tell me what happened tonight, Garcia said, looking at the mother-in-law. It was Carlos's birthday. A few guests came over. My son drank a glass of wine and fell ill. He lost consciousness. I called the ambulance. Her tone was brisk and emotionless. And you, the officer asked, turning to Magdalena. I was at the party too. We were sitting at the table when Carlos collapsed. I saw him choking on wine or something else. I tried to help. Magdalena didn't want to lie, but she also wasn't ready to reveal everything. She needed to hear what the mother-in-law would say first, see where she was heading. We suspect poisoning. Do you have any explanation? Garcia continued. I have no idea what could have poisoned my son, the mother-in-law said with a dramatic sigh. But his wife, she poured the wine, switched glasses. Maybe she did it. The officer frowned and looked at Magdalena. Did you pour the wine? No. My mother-in-law poured the wine, Magdalena replied calmly. I only picked up my glass. That's not true, the mother-in-law exclaimed. She said, I will be happy, and switched glasses with Carlos right in front of me. Garcia raised his eyebrows and looked at Magdalena with curiosity. Did you switch glasses? Yes, I switched the glasses, but not because I wanted to poison him. I noticed something odd in mine, Magdalena said, then fell silent, realizing she might be revealing too much too soon. But perhaps there was no point in hiding anything anymore. Her mother-in-law interrupted sharply. She did it on purpose. She wanted to get rid of my son, to take all the money, the property, the apartment. Wait a second, Magdalena raised her voice slightly, trying to remain polite. Why would I want to get rid of Carlos when all the property belongs to your family? I have no legal claim to anything. You have life insurance, the mother-in-law sneered. And I bet he's the beneficiary. The police officer raised a hand to calm them. All right, enough. One at a time. And no baseless accusations. If you, he said, nodding at the mother-in-law, believe your daughter-in-law is involved, you'll need evidence, not just words. I have a recording, Magdalena said suddenly. What kind of recording? Garcia asked. An audio recording from a voice recorder I had in my pocket. It captured the beginning of the dinner, some of the conversation, including things said by the mother-in-law and possibly Carlos, talking about something being added to a glass. We never talked about anything like that, the mother-in-law cried out, turning pale. All right, the officer said, now clearly intrigued. If you have that recording, we'll need to listen to it. Of course, but it may contain a lot of background noise. It would be best if the experts examined it, Magdalena replied, feeling more confident. I'm ready to hand it over, but only with a proper protocol, so nothing gets lost. Understood. For now, let's keep it with you. But let me listen to a segment right now, here. Of course, Magdalena nodded, pulling the recorder from her bag. The mother-in-law sat as if on pins and needles, nervously clenching and unclenching her fingers. The officer leaned closer as Magdalena rewound the tape and pressed play. Muted voices filled the room, laughter, the sound of wine being poured. Then the mother-in-law's voice rang clearly, Iris Feliz? Just as Magdalena had said, her own voice replied, I will be in a moment. There was the clinking of glasses, footsteps, a few indistinct phrases. Nothing overtly incriminating, until a whisper from the mother-in-law, just don't mix up the glasses. Then Carlos's voice, yeah, I got it. The officer's eyebrows lifted. He looked at the mother-in-law. What does that mean, don't mix up the glasses, he asked coldly. It was, because we had different preferences, she stammered. I asked Carlos to pour me dry wine and her semi-sweet. We just didn't want to confuse them. The officer nodded, unconvinced. Right. Keep playing. Magdalena clicked play again. More guest chatter, toasts, laughter. Then her own voice, faintly, I wonder what that is floating there. Then came faint muttering from the mother-in-law, only fragments were audible, very important, we'll handle it later. A loud crash, the moment Carlos collapsed. The recording ended, either stopped manually or from the recorder shutting off. The officer turned off the device and looked at both women. Well, one thing is clear, he said, addressing the mother-in-law. You warned your son not to confuse the glasses. That's suspicious. It was a domestic detail, she tried to regain composure. There's nothing criminal in that. If he mixed them up, that's on him. All right, maybe, Garcia said. But the poisoning is confirmed. Who had access? I already said, she did, the mother-in-law pointed at Magdalena. She switched the glasses. You heard her, I will be in a moment. And I heard you whisper, just don't mix up the glasses. Question is, how did you know one glass had something wrong and the other didn't? Garcia narrowed his eyes. The mother-in-law went silent, realizing she'd trapped herself. Magdalena said nothing, gripping the recorder. Finally, the officer spoke, all right, figuring this out won't take 5 minutes. Tomorrow, we'll get the lab results. Then I'll come to your house, he looked at Magdalena, where it all happened. I'll talk to other guests, collect wine samples, maybe find more. You're both free to go. But leave the room calmly, no shouting. The women stood. They exited the room, staying as far apart as possible. Magdalena didn't speak first, but as they reached the stairs, the mother-in-law muttered, if you think you'll get away with this, you're mistaken. I'm innocent, Magdalena replied. We'll see who has better connections. She's threatening me, Magdalena thought, but didn't want a scene, especially not in a hospital. She turned away and walked out. The night was dark, streetlights scattered here and there. Magdalena got into her car and thought, I need a safe place to spend the night, maybe a few. Returning to the apartment she'd shared with Carlos felt like suicide. Who knew what traps they'd left? Staying at the country house, soaked in the family's poison, wasn't better. She thought of Anna, her college friend. Maybe Anna would understand. She called, and after several rings, Anna answered, sleepy, hello? Magda? What's going on? It's nearly 3 a.m. Anna, I'm sorry. I really need a place to stay. Just for tonight, please. Of course, come over. Anna immediately understood, it had to be serious. Magdalena confirmed the address and headed over. By the time she arrived, it was well past midnight. Anna, a petite redhead with freckles, opened the door in a bathrobe, looking concerned. Magdalena, what happened? She asked, closing the door. It's a long story, Magdalena said softly, stepping into the small entryway. I'll put on the kettle. You can tell me everything, Anna said, noticing her friend was shaking. They sat in the kitchen. Magdalena sank onto a stool, overwhelmed. Anna poured them green tea and sat across from her. Okay, tell me, you're scaring me, she urged. Magdalena began, first briefly, then with more detail. Carlos's strange behavior. His mother's hostility. The fateful birthday. The glasses. The recorder. The poisoning. The hospital. The police. Several times she nearly broke down, but held on. Anna listened, wide-eyed and horrified. What a nightmare, Anna finally whispered. They really tried to kill you? It looks like it, Magdalena said bitterly. If I hadn't switched glasses, I'd be in intensive care. Anna shuddered. My God. I just hope the police do their job. But with that woman's connections, or Carlos, if he wakes up, they could pin this on you. Anna grabbed her friend's hands. Magda, don't worry. First, you have the recording. Second, it all makes sense. His mother poured the wine. She said not to mix up the glasses. And yet Carlos was poisoned. How could they blame you? I know, but it's still terrifying. He used to be the man I loved. Now he's my enemy. I understand. But listen, you can stay here as long as you need. Not just tonight. Thank you, Anna. Magdalena smiled faintly. That's why I came. Make yourself at home. I've only got one bedroom, but the sofa's comfortable. Want me to make it up for you? Yes, please. I'm exhausted. Anna nodded and left to prepare the living room. Magdalena stayed with her tea, heart still storming, but with Anna nearby, she didn't feel so alone. When the sofa was ready, Anna called her. Magdalena stepped into the room as Anna turned on the nightlight. Sorry, I need to get a little sleep. Work in the morning. But we'll talk more when I'm back. I'll turn off the light, okay? Of course, Magdalena said. I'm just down the hall, Anna added, and left. Magdalena lay on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket. The soft glow of the lamp cast odd shadows across the walls. She closed her eyes and immediately saw the scene, the wine pouring, Carlos collapsing, her hand switching glasses. She shuddered. If I hadn't switched them. Before falling asleep, Magdalena made herself a promise: she would fight. She would survive. And she would see the guilty punished. I won't let them destroy me, she whispered, clutching the pillow as sleep finally took her. In the morning, she woke to the smell of coffee. Blinking, she saw Anna, dressed in her office suit, standing over her with a steaming mug. Good morning, Anna said gently. I'm heading to work soon, but here's some coffee. Magdalena sat up, took the cup, and sipped. The warmth helped her feel more grounded. She had decisions to make today. She remembered the police officer who had said he would continue the investigation today. I probably shouldn't just sit here either. I should go to the police. Maybe I've been given a time, or maybe to the hospital, Magdalena said, rubbing her stiff neck. What if Carlos has regained consciousness? Be careful, Anna warned. What if your mother-in-law is already there? I'll be extremely careful. The two friends exchanged a brief hug, and Anna rushed off to work, leaving Magdalena a spare set of keys so she could return any time. Magdalena took a quick shower and got herself together. Anna lent her some clothes, since Magdalena had arrived late last night with just a small bag. Leaving the building, Magdalena got into her car, which was parked in the courtyard. Her reflection in the rearview mirror looked a little worn, but her eyes burned with determination. I need to figure everything out and make sure the truth comes to light, she told herself. She first headed to the police station, afraid she might be accused of avoiding contact or hiding. Once there, she was told that Inspector Garcia would only be available in the afternoon. She was offered to wait or return later. After weighing her options, she decided to go to the hospital to check on Carlos's condition and perhaps speak with the doctors. Arriving at the hospital, Magdalena went to the reception desk and asked the nurse on duty about Carlos. She was told that he was in intensive care but had already regained consciousness and been moved to a more stable condition. Visits were still restricted, but the doctors might allow a close relative, like his mother or wife, if the patient agreed. I'm his wife, Magdalena said, feeling a strange mix of relief and anxiety at the thought that Carlos was awake. All right, I'll ask the doctor if you can go in, the nurse replied and asked her to wait in the corridor. Magdalena nervously paced back and forth until a doctor finally came out to her. He wore a white cap and a surgical mask that hung loosely around his neck. Are you Magdalena, Carlos's wife? He asked. Yes. May I see him? We normally don't allow visitors in ICU, but the patient did ask where you were. Apparently he wants to speak to you, just 5 minutes, please. Thank you very much. Magdalena put on shoe covers, a sterile gown, and followed the doctor into the ward. The smell of medication, the white walls, the sounds of the monitors, it all instilled fear. The doctor stopped in front of one of the rooms. He's in here. Go ahead, but please try not to upset him. Magdalena nodded and entered. Carlos was lying in a hospital bed, a sensor attached to his forehead and an IV in his arm. He looked ill, his face was pale, dark circles under his eyes, but he was conscious and turned his head when he saw her. "Magda," he rasped. Her heart tightened at the strange mixture of pity and anger. This was still the man she had once shared a bed with, made plans with, and now he was one of the conspirators against her. But she forced herself to stay calm. "Hi, Carlos," she said quietly, stepping closer. You know I didn't want this." "It was all Mom," he breathed heavily, swallowing. Magdalena felt a sharp pang in her chest. So now he was trying to blame everything on his mother? "You mean you had nothing to do with it?" she asked, struggling to keep the bitterness from her voice. Carlos coughed and winced in pain. "I didn't know it would go that far. I thought you'd just fall asleep maybe." She said, "It's just a mild sedative, meant to knock her out for a bit." "You're lying, Carlos," Magdalena said quietly. "I heard your conversation on the recording, just don't mix up the glasses." "So you knew one glass had something dangerous in it?" He coughed again. "I didn't want you to die, I swear. I just wanted you unconscious. Mom wanted to take you somewhere, maybe to a clinic." "A clinic?" Magdalena asked skeptically. "Do you even hear what nonsense you're saying?" Carlos closed his eyes. It was clear he was struggling to speak, but he gathered his strength and continued. "Maybe I did everything stupidly. But Mom convinced me it was for the best. She said you were trying to ruin us, steal the business, that you were scheming behind our backs." "I'm sorry, I believed her." Magdalena was stunned. So the mother-in-law really did feed him lies, and he, simple-minded as he was, believed her. But still, he was a grown man. Wasn't he capable of figuring things out himself? "Listen, Carlos," she said, fighting her emotions. "I never wanted to take anything. I loved you. But what you did, that was an attempt on my life. And in the end, you drank the poison yourself." "It wasn't poison," Carlos said hastily. "It was supposed to be a sedative. According to the doctor, it was a toxic substance. If it were only a sedative, you wouldn't be in this condition," Magdalena frowned. "So your mother put something more serious in it." Carlos clenched his fists in pain. "So, she lied to me too." "I didn't know." Magdalena looked at him with both compassion and disgust. If he was telling the truth, his mother had pulled him into a criminal plan. If not, he was her full accomplice. "Tell me, why did you want to knock me out?" "What was the plan?" she asked. Carlos breathed heavily, as if afraid to speak the truth, but he knew it was too late to hide. "Mom said we'd take you to a psychiatric clinic, say you had a breakdown. She wanted to keep you there while we did something with the property papers, maybe the insurance too. I don't know exactly." Magdalena felt like the ground was slipping from under her. So much cold calculation, such cynicism. "And you? What did you think about it?" Carlos looked away. "I was scared. But Mom said you were interfering too much, that we needed to protect ourselves." "I'm sorry, Magda. I'm an idiot." Magdalena stood, trying to process what she'd just heard. So yes, the mother-in-law had been the main initiator, but Carlos was guilty too, no matter how you looked at it. "Well then, you'll have to repeat all this to the police," she said firmly. "Because I'm going all the way." Carlos turned his head and looked her in the eye. "I understand. And if I have to, I'll tell them everything. I don't care anymore, I just want out of this." Magdalena felt a strange sense of relief, like one of the knots had loosened, but only briefly. Her mother-in-law wouldn't give up easily. At that moment, the doctor peeked into the room. "Sorry, time's up. The patient needs to rest." Magdalena nodded and leaned toward Carlos. "Get better, and think about how we're going to live from here on out." He nodded weakly and closed his eyes. Magdalena stepped out of the room, unsure of what she truly felt toward him, pity, hatred, disgust, or remnants of love. Most likely, it was all mixed together. Leaving the hospital, Magdalena looked at her watch. It wasn't even noon. She decided to return to the police station and wait for Inspector Garcia to share the new information. Once there, she waited for nearly an hour until Garcia arrived. He spotted her and nodded. "Come in." Magdalena entered his office and sat down on a hard chair. Garcia pulled out some paperwork. "So, any updates?" "I visited my husband at the hospital. He's awake. He says it was all his mother's idea. Apparently, she misled him about what was in the wine, said it was just a sedative, but it turned out to be poison." Garcia jotted something down. "I see. Can you confirm any of that?" "He's willing to talk himself. Maybe you can go to the hospital and speak to him?" "We'll do that as soon as possible. We've already requested the test results. Things will be clearer soon." Magdalena nodded. "Also," Garcia added, "we've spoken to a few guests. They confirmed that you sat at the table and that your mother-in-law poured the wine. One guest even remembered you switching glasses with Carlos, but no one knows why." "I saw some residue in my glass," Magdalena said. "So I switched." "Understood. By the way, we collected the remaining wine and the broken glass from the scene. The chemical analysis will take several days, but initial tests show traces of toxic substances. I can't say more yet." "Got it," Magdalena sighed. "Inspector, you do realize my mother-in-law might try to bribe someone, manipulate things? We're not amateurs. If there's evidence and testimony, we'll handle it." Magdalena looked at him gratefully. She wanted to believe that justice would prevail. "There's also a chance she'll try to eliminate me again," she added with concern. "I'd advise you not to be alone, not to stay anywhere unsafe. Maybe hire protection or stay with friends." "I'm already staying at a friend's place." "Thanks." "Good. Here's what we'll do. You leave me your number. I'll call you as soon as we have lab results. And if anything new comes up, you call me." "All right." Magdalena gave him a business card she always kept in her wallet. Garcia took it and nodded. "You're free to go, but be prepared to be summoned for questioning at any time." "I understand." "Thank you." Magdalena left the office feeling a bit calmer. The situation was still difficult, but now the police had become involved. There was a recording device, test results, and even Carlos himself seemed willing to confirm Magdalena's words. After leaving the police station, Magdalena sat in the car for a while, thinking about her next steps. She didn't want to return to the apartment she had shared with Carlos, too many bad memories, and it might still be dangerous. She would have preferred to stay with Ana, but didn't want to impose for too long. On the other hand, Ana had said herself that Magdalena could stay as long as she needed. Magdalena started the engine and decided to drive home anyway, to pick up some personal belongings and documents, just in case. She knew her mother-in-law might show up too, but hoped that she was currently preoccupied with Carlos's condition or talking to lawyers. When she arrived at the apartment building where she and Carlos had lived, Magdalena felt a sudden wave of anxiety. She got out of the car, entered the building, and took the elevator up. She paused for a couple of seconds before inserting the key into the lock, hoping deep down that no one would be inside. The door opened, the apartment appeared empty. She stepped in and turned on the lights. Everything was just as it had been, the hallway where their wedding photos still hung, she and Carlos smiling in each other's arms. The sight of it now made her heart ache. Magdalena walked into the bedroom and began packing what she needed: clothes, her laptop, a few documents. Her hands trembled slightly as she realized that once, this place had felt like a cozy nest, and now it seemed like enemy territory. When she stepped into the kitchen, she saw a simple but painful scene: a vase with wilted flowers on the table, the last bouquet Carlos had given her a few weeks ago. The flowers were dried up, like a symbol of their relationship. Magdalena sighed and threw them into a trash bag. Then she felt an urge to check the drawers, hoping to find clues about her mother-in-law's activities. She opened one cabinet. It contained old prescriptions and tear-off calendars. In another, a mix of cold medicine and painkillers. Nothing suspicious. They must have brought the poison from outside, she thought. Having packed everything she needed, Magdalena was about to leave when she suddenly heard shuffling behind the door. Her heart skipped a beat. Who's there? She thought. Then came a knock. Who is it? Magdalena asked aloud, tiptoeing toward the peephole. It's me. Open the door, came the familiar voice, your mother-in-law. Magdalena froze inside. Damn it, what does she want? She knew opening the door was risky, but staying silent was pointless. Her shoes were visible. The woman would know she was inside. Magdalena clutched her phone, ready to call the police if things went wrong. She pulled out the recorder, hit record, and slipped it into her pocket. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Her mother-in-law stood there, with her personal driver Andres beside her, a tall man with a grim face. May I come in? Her mother-in-law asked in a tone that brooked no refusal. What for? I want to talk. Then talk here, Magdalena said, firmly blocking the entrance. Well then, the woman said, glancing around warily, last night you tried to make me look like a monster, a poisoner, but my son is alive. Yes, he is, thankfully. He told you I'm to blame, didn't he? Yes. That's exactly what he said. Right, so now he wants to pin everything he did on me. That ungrateful bastard. She was clearly furious. Magdalena held the door tightly, one foot still against the threshold. You should leave. I'm going to call the police. Don't be hasty. Let's talk like adults. You know, we have money, connections. Any forensic report can be arranged, any recordings can disappear. Then you will end up in prison as the main suspect. That sounds like blackmail, Magdalena said coldly, though a chill ran down her spine. The woman looked her straight in the eyes. Yes, it's an offer. You withdraw your statement, stay out of our family's business, leave quietly, forget us. You'll receive compensation, say, 100,000 euros. Go live wherever you want, 100,000 euros is a lot of money. Magdalena felt a pang, but she knew this was a deal. Her mother-in-law was trying to buy her silence and escape criminal liability. You're trying to bribe me? Magdalena repeated as if in disbelief. You see no other way out? Carlos betrayed me by blaming me for everything, but I can still save him. And you could avoid problems too. Magdalena looked into her cold eyes and realized this woman was capable of anything. You think you can buy my silence? And what if I refuse? Then I'll make sure you go to prison. I'll dig up dirt on you, plant drugs if needed, or use my people in law enforcement. In this country, many things can be arranged. That's a threat, Magdalena said louder. Call it what you want, the woman replied, lifting an eyebrow. But I'm giving you a choice. Magdalena tightened her grip on the phone, her heart pounding, though she tried not to show fear. I don't need your bribe. I want nothing more to do with you. I'll go to the police and see this through. Her mother-in-law smirked disdainfully. Foolish. You're signing your own sentence. Don't forget, I can do many things to make you regret this. Goodbye, Magdalena said, stepping back and slamming the door in their faces. They shouted curses from the hallway, but Magdalena turned the key in the lock. She was shaking. She tried to bribe me, threatened to frame me, Magdalena thought, and I recorded it all. She checked the recorder, it was still running. Now she had proof of direct threats and attempted bribery. Well, mother-in-law, you've just buried yourself, Magdalena thought grimly. But relief didn't come. On the contrary, anxiety only grew. She really could strike. She could have me kidnapped, killed, plant drugs, anything. I must be extremely careful. Pulling herself together, Magdalena waited until the footsteps faded. Then she opened the door, scanned the empty stairwell, exited quickly, locked the apartment, and quietly took the elevator down. She got in the car and drove back to Anna's place. When Magdalena returned, Anna was already home, apparently taking time off or coming home early. Seeing Magdalena's pale face and trembling hands, Anna immediately grew concerned. What happened? Magdalena walked into the kitchen, dropped her bag, sat down, and recounted the encounter with her mother-in-law word for word. Anna listened, mouth agape. Wow. Seriously? And you recorded it? Yes, Magdalena nodded. Good thing you had the recorder ready. I now have 2 recordings, one from the night of the birthday and one of her threats. Anna whistled. That's serious. There's solid evidence now, but she really could make my life hell. I'm scared. Anna approached and hugged her by the shoulders. You can stay with me as long as you need. I won't leave you alone. Thank you, Anna, Magdalena whispered, eyes filling with tears. It was a blessing to have such a friend, and a bitter realization of what might happen if her mother-in-law decided to go to extremes. Maybe we should contact a good lawyer? Anna suggested. I know someone who handles cases like this. She might know how to protect you. Yes, great idea. I don't want to be without legal protection. Anna grabbed her phone and made a call. After a few minutes, she handed it to Magdalena. My friend, Natalia, she's a lawyer. Talk to her, tell her what's going on. Magdalena took the phone, trying to sound calm, though inside she was anxious. She briefly explained the situation. Natalia, as it turned out, was an experienced lawyer with solid credentials. She listened carefully and gave several recommendations. Hand over the audio recordings to the police immediately, but make copies in case the originals get lost. File a written statement about the threats and attempted bribery, referring to the recordings as evidence. Involve a lawyer officially to monitor the investigation and prevent the case from being buried. Natalia agreed to meet Magdalena later that evening or the next morning to formalize their cooperation. Magdalena thanked her and ended the call. Well? Anna asked. Thanks for the contact. She seems to know what to do. I'll meet her tomorrow. Anna smiled. Don't worry. Everything will work out. Magdalena tried to spend the rest of the day as calmly as possible. She had lunch with Anna, watched some TV, though anxiety never fully left her. That evening, Inspector Garcia called. He said her mother-in-law had already filed a complaint, accusing Magdalena of trying to poison Carlos for personal gain. Of course, Magdalena said bitterly. But I have a new recording, her offering me a bribe and making threats. Seriously? Garcia asked. Yes, I recorded everything. Want a copy? Bring it tomorrow morning. It'll help a lot. Magdalena nodded. That gave her a bit of peace of mind. Maybe her mother-in-law would convince the police with her lies, but this new recording could set the record straight. Emotionally drained, Magdalena went to bed early. Nightmares haunted her, but she tried to fight them off by reminding herself, I have a friend. I have a lawyer. I have an honest cop. I have a recorder. I can win. The next morning, Magdalena had breakfast with Anna and headed to meet Natalia at her law office. It was a bright space in the city center. Natalia turned out to be a slender brunette in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a confident manner. They sat down in a small conference room, and Magdalena told her everything in detail once again. Then she handed over a flash drive. There are 2 files here, one from the birthday night, and one where my mother-in-law threatens me and offers a bribe. Natalia smiled. Excellent. Audio recordings can be decisive evidence. But there's a risk the court won't accept them if made without the other party's consent. The law does allow recordings if it's to protect one's rights, she reassured Magdalena. Especially in life-threatening situations. The court is very likely to admit them. Good, Magdalena nodded. Let me review the material. Then we'll officially notify the investigator that I'm entering the case as your legal representative and submit the recordings. We'll also file a complaint against your mother-in-law for extortion and threats. Agreed, Magdalena said. I'd also like you or someone from your team to accompany me during police questioning. No problem. I'll handle all official contacts with you. Just keep me updated, calls from the police, any meetings with your mother-in-law, everything. Thank you. I already feel better knowing you're on my side. Natalia smiled and reached out to shake her hand. Agreed. Magdalena shook her hand, feeling a wave of relief and gratitude. Then they went over a few remaining formalities, legal fees, providing copies of documents, and confirming that it was currently unsafe for Magdalena to appear in certain places. Natalia offered her advice on how to minimize risks and document any threats. And one more thing, I know a private investigator who could gather additional information on your mother-in-law, Natalia added. We might be able to dig up something from her shady past. That would be great, Magdalena replied enthusiastically. After the meeting, Magdalena felt a surge of strength. She now had a plan, a lawyer, and evidence. She got into her car and drove straight to the police station to fulfill her promise to hand Inspector Garcia a copy of the recording. At the station, she was quickly shown to Garcia's office. She handed him the flash drive and briefly explained what was on it. Perfect, said Garcia, inserting the drive into his computer. Let's take a look. Magdalena watched as he listened to the second recording, the one with her mother-in-law, and saw his face grow more serious, then visibly satisfied. Yeah, this is serious, he commented. That's a clear case of threat and bribery, she even names the amount. Thank you, this is crucial evidence. I'll write up the official report now. Do you mind if we formally seize the recording and send it for forensic analysis? I don't mind, I have a copy, Magdalena replied. Excellent. Garcia began typing the documents, and Magdalena signed the appropriate forms, officially handing over the recordings. Then he said, We've already taken your husband's statement. He admitted knowing about his mother's intent to slip something into your drink, but claimed he didn't realize it was poison. He told me the same, Magdalena nodded. We don't have direct evidence that he intended to kill, but his participation in the conspiracy is serious. We'll see how things unfold. Magdalena nodded again. And your mother-in-law, she asked, knowing what that woman was capable of. We've summoned her to testify tomorrow. Hopefully she'll appear, if not, we'll take action. Your recording gives us grounds to formally charge her with bribery and threats. She's backed herself into a corner. She might run or come up with something else. Don't worry, we have other ways to apply pressure. Magdalena exhaled with relief. She was increasingly convinced that Garcia was a decent man. Okay, I'll wait to hear back from you. Keep your phone on, he reminded her. As Magdalena was about to leave, Garcia added, And I advise you to keep being cautious, you never know. Understood. Thank you. She left his office feeling hopeful that justice might finally be within reach. Back at Anna's, she found her friend at the stove cooking something delicious. It seemed Anna had taken the day off to support her. Perfect timing. How did it go? Anna asked with a smile. Magdalena shared everything, her meeting with the lawyer, how the police had reacted to the recording. Anna was relieved to hear that the case was moving forward. I hope your mother-in-law either ends up in prison or finally backs off forever, she said firmly. That's what I hope too. I just want to breathe again. Live in peace. Anna set a dish of paella on the table and invited Magdalena to eat. As they sat down, Anna casually asked, So, how do you see your life going forward? I mean, Carlos is still your husband, but it's clear you can't trust him anymore. I honestly don't know, Magdalena said sadly. I feel so conflicted, hurt, angry, even sympathetic because he almost died too. But I don't think I can live with him again. It'll probably end in divorce. I think that's the best choice, Anna said, supporting her. Though of course, it depends on how the case plays out. Yes, Magdalena sighed. After lunch, she tried to distract herself by watching a TV series, but her thoughts kept returning to everything that had happened. She didn't want to stay in a victim mindset forever, but she needed time to feel whole again. The next morning, Magdalena woke up early, anxious. Her mother-in-law was supposed to testify today. She couldn't wait to hear what she would say. Soon the phone rang. The screen showed Garcia's number. Magdalena answered quickly. "Hello," came the inspector's weary voice. "So here's the situation. Your mother-in-law showed up with her lawyer. They're taking the position, I deny everything, the recording is fake, that's not my voice." "But surely you don't believe that?" Magdalena asked, shocked. "Of course not. We'll conduct a voice analysis and forensic review of the recording. But until the court makes a decision, she'll remain free. She hasn't been arrested yet, although we're considering a motion for pretrial detention. Are you going to file that motion?" Magdalena asked hopefully. "Most likely, yes, but the court may not approve it. She has connections, a lot of influence. What do we do now?" Magdalena felt another wave of anxiety. "We keep collecting evidence, running analyses, and checking her contacts. You take care of yourself. Be careful. If anything happens, call me or dial 112 immediately." Magdalena thanked the inspector and hung up. She sat on the sofa, staring out the window. She can deny all she wants, Magdalena thought, but there are the recordings, the forensic results, Carlos's testimony, the guests, but the anxiety wouldn't go away. What if she goes to the extreme, has me killed before the trial? Magdalena called her lawyer Natalia again. They discussed the situation. Natalia reassured her that the case wouldn't fall apart, there was too much clear evidence. Still, they had to be ready for a tough legal battle. Her mother-in-law wasn't giving up easily. Another week passed in tense anticipation. Magdalena stayed at Anna's, had regular conversations with her lawyer, visited the police to provide follow-up statements. Carlos was recovering, still in the hospital, but ready to be discharged. One day, Magdalena received a message from him. "I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. I want to talk." At first, she didn't respond. But then she decided she needed to know what he wanted. They met in the hospital courtyard, where Carlos was now allowed to walk. He looked thinner, weaker. When he saw her, he tried to smile, but it came out strained. "Hi," he said. "Hi. How are you?" "Trying to recover. Listen, I know there's a huge gap between us now, but I want to try to explain things." Magdalena kept her distance, standing far enough that he couldn't touch her. "Go ahead," she said curtly. "My mother, she's very controlling, as you know. She wanted complete control over my marriage, my money. At some point, she decided you were a threat. She started saying awful things about you. At first, I didn't believe her, but then, we had some arguments, misunderstandings, and I began to doubt whether you were being honest with me." "Misunderstandings aren't a reason to want me poisoned," Magdalena said bitterly. "I know. I'm sorry. I was afraid to stand up to her. She's too powerful, and I'm a coward." Magdalena steadied his face. His eyes were full of regret and fear. Part of her wanted to scream, slap him, or even hug him, but her emotions were too conflicted. "And now?" she asked. "I'm going to testify against her. She threatened me too, said I'd go to jail. But my lawyers say that if I cooperate and admit guilt, I could get a suspended sentence or something similar. I won't stop you." "Do what you need to do," Magdalena said. "Magda, I still love you, and maybe I'm an idiot, but—" "Don't," she interrupted him, quietly but firmly. He wilted at her words, realizing there would be no second chance. "Okay," he whispered. "I understand. Take care of yourself, Carlos. And be ready to face the consequences." With that, she turned and walked away, feeling her emotions boiling. He loves me, but let his mother try to poison me. What kind of love is that? She thought bitterly. A few days later, Magdalena received a court summons. First, there would be a preliminary hearing on her mother-in-law's pretrial detention. Natalia reassured her they would request custody based on the threat evidence. That might protect Magdalena from further danger. That day, both Magdalena and Natalia arrived early at the courthouse. The small courtroom, where detention decisions were usually made, was full: judge, clerk, prosecutor, her mother-in-law with her lawyer, Carlos, still weak but discharged, several journalists sensing a big case, and police officers. When the hearing began, the prosecutor laid out the accusations: attempted murder, threats, bribery. Magdalena trembled as she listened. This was about the woman who was supposed to be like a second mother to her. The defense attorney, a clean-shaven man in his 40s, passionately argued that the recordings were fake. Carlos had been poisoned by bad wine, and the daughter-in-law was acting out of greed. The judge asked the mother-in-law, "Do you acknowledge that it's your voice in the recording, offering a bribe and making threats?" "No, it's fake," she said coldly. Then Natalia presented the preliminary audio analysis report: no signs of tampering and a voice match with public recordings of the mother-in-law speaking at conferences. Carlos, looking worn out, confirmed that his mother had poured the wine and told him to add something to Magdalena's glass. His voice trembled. He could feel his mother's glare, but he spoke the truth. His mother looked at him like she might attack him on the spot. The defense claimed Carlos was confused and had been manipulated by his ex-wife. But the prosecutor countered: the recordings were authentic and unaltered. After much back and forth, the judge declared that due to the severity of the charges and the confirmed threats against Magdalena, the mother-in-law would be held in custody until trial to prevent interference. "What?" she shouted, jumping to her feet. "This is madness. I won't let this stand." The judge sternly ordered order in the courtroom, and the guards led her out. She managed one last hateful glare at Magdalena. "You'll regret this," she hissed, but was already being escorted away. Magdalena felt a wave of fear, but Natalia stood by her, nodding encouragingly. "It's okay. She can't get to you now." For the first time, Magdalena felt genuine relief. The trial was still ahead, with long hearings and the mother-in-law's defense doing everything possible to free her, but the fact that she was in custody gave Magdalena a chance to breathe. That evening, back at Anna's, Magdalena finally let her emotions out. They sat on the cozy couch, and she cried, tears of relief and exhaustion. Anna gently hugged her. "Cry. It'll help," she whispered. "I'm just so scared. What if she still has powerful friends?" Magdalena sobbed. "Let her. Everything's official now. It's harder to corrupt the system when a case is public and journalists are watching. Natalia says it's going to be okay." Magdalena nodded, wiping her tears. "You're right. Thank you for being here." "Of course. I wouldn't leave you," Anna said with a smile. Magdalena felt deep gratitude for her friend. "It'll take time to recover from all of this. Scars like this don't fade overnight," Anna said seriously. "But I believe you'll heal with time." "Maybe I should see a therapist," Magdalena mused. "Great idea. I'll give you a contact." They hugged, feeling the worst part might be behind them. Weeks passed. The case slowly but steadily moved toward trial. Magdalena began to rebuild her life. She worked remotely in the mornings. Her employer had been supportive. She met regularly with her lawyer and gave statements to the investigator. Carlos continued cooperating, hoping for leniency. Her mother-in-law remained in custody. All attempts to be released on bail were denied. The court cited the risks, threats, and audio recordings. At some point, Magdalena realized the nightmare was behind her. She hadn't been killed, institutionalized, or framed. In the eyes of the public and the police, her mother-in-law was now the criminal. But the emotional wounds remained. She had been betrayed by the man she once adored. With the help of the therapist Anna had recommended, Magdalena began to process her emotions and understand that it was okay to move forward, and that she didn't have to carry guilt for what had been done to her. "You are not to blame for another person choosing a criminal path," the psychologist said. "You were also a victim of manipulation." Magdalena nodded, understanding that her journey to emotional healing would be long. At last, the day of the main trial arrived. Magdalena felt inwardly prepared. Her lawyer was by her side, her friend Anna was there, and most importantly, the evidence was now undeniable. The press was present too, as scandals in wealthy families always attracted attention. In the courtroom, Magdalena saw Carlos sitting apart from his mother and her attorney. He looked dejected and avoided her gaze, while his mother cast hateful glances at him. It was obvious she saw her son as a traitor. The trial lasted several days. Evidence was examined, experts testified about the chemical analysis of the wine and the audio recordings. It was revealed that the wine had been laced with a substance which, in the right dose, could cause cardiac arrest. The claim that it was merely a sedative was exposed as a lie. Carlos likely hadn't fully understood what was happening. The mother-in-law's lawyers tried to argue that the recordings were fabricated, that the witnesses had been bribed, but the judge took the investigation seriously. Forensic tests confirmed the recordings were authentic. Witnesses, including party guests, testified that the mother-in-law had poured the wine herself. Carlos admitted partial involvement, pleaded for leniency, and said that his mother had misled him. In the end, the court found the mother-in-law guilty of attempted murder, threats, and bribery. Carlos received a suspended sentence for being an accomplice. When the verdict was announced, the mother-in-law shouted with venom, "You all sold yourselves to that tramp. I'll be back." But the bailiffs quickly restrained her. Magdalena broke into tears of relief as she heard the sentence. Natalia placed a comforting hand on her shoulder and smiled. It was over, justice had been served. After the trial, Magdalena took decisive steps to finalize her divorce from Carlos. He didn't resist, he signed the papers without objection. During one of their final conversations, Carlos said, "I'm sorry. I know I destroyed everything." Magdalena simply sighed. "Maybe someday I'll forgive you. But there's no going back to how things were." "I understand," he said, lowering his gaze. The divorce went quickly. Magdalena didn't contest any shared property, she just wanted to move on. Carlos made no claims to her apartment, which had always belonged to her even before the marriage. It was now a time for reflection. Magdalena continued therapy with her psychologist, had long talks with Anna, and gradually found herself again. She had changed, stronger, more cautious in whom she trusted, but she hadn't lost her softness or her capacity for empathy. Several months after the verdict, life began to settle. Magdalena rented a small apartment in another part of town, determined to start anew. She remained deeply grateful to Anna for her support and friendship. One evening, Anna invited her to a small get-together with a few friends, including a young man named Ramon, a colleague of hers. He listened to Magdalena with interest, shared stories about his travels, and for the first time in a long while, Magdalena felt at ease speaking with a stranger, unafraid of betrayal. When the evening ended, Ramon asked for her number. Embarrassed but smiling, she gave it. The next day, when he called and suggested a walk along the Barcelona waterfront, Magdalena surprised herself by saying yes. It was autumn, the air crisp, golden leaves covering the walkways. Magdalena walked arm in arm with Ramon along the Mediterranean, feeling a gentle joy stir within her. They laughed and shared stories. She realized she wanted to open up, though she didn't go into the grim details of her past, choosing instead to leave that behind. Not long after, Ramon admitted that he liked her and asked if she'd like to start seeing each other. Looking into his sincere eyes, Magdalena sensed that life might be offering her a chance at happiness. 6 months passed. Magdalena had regained her emotional balance, even though the scars of betrayal and the criminal conspiracy remained. Her mother-in-law was serving a real prison sentence. Carlos was living his own life, and Magdalena had cut all ties with him. She moved out of the rental and back into her own apartment, which she renovated completely to erase the shadows of her former life. She continued to work remotely, occasionally taking freelance projects to increase her income and sense of independence. Her relationship with Ramon developed steadily, without rushing. He was gentle, attentive, and Magdalena slowly began to believe that good people still existed. One evening, while they were having dinner at her place, Ramon suddenly asked, You look at me like you're afraid. What's going on? Magdalena lowered her gaze. I'm sorry. I still have nightmares sometimes where someone tries to poison me. Ramon gently touched her hand. I won't be offended if it takes time for you to get used to me. I'm not in a hurry. Magdalena smiled. Thank you. That means a lot to me. Time passed, and Magdalena realized that her heart was gradually filling with a quiet, steady joy. She no longer expected betrayal at every turn, though caution had become second nature. Ramon surrounded her with patience and care, understanding that she needed space to continue healing. Almost a year into their relationship, Magdalena finally found the courage to tell him everything, without filters. How her mother-in-law and husband had tried to poison her, how she narrowly escaped, the police, the trial. Ramon listened, stunned, exclaiming a few times, Dios mío! What madness! But in the end, he embraced her and said, I'm proud of you for surviving all of that. It only makes you stronger. Magdalena rested her head on his shoulder, tears filling her eyes, not from fear, but from gratitude that he accepted her past along with her. Months passed. Magdalena lived without fear for her life, without the haunting weight of painful memories. Though the past occasionally surfaced, she had learned to manage it. She still met with her lawyer Natalia from time to time, who reported that her mother-in-law kept filing appeals, all of which were denied. She's not going anywhere anytime soon, Natalia would say. One night, Magdalena had a dream. She saw herself at that fateful table with the wine glasses. Her mother-in-law asked, Eres feliz? But in the dream, Magdalena answered confidently, Yes, I am happy. And her mother-in-law vanished. She woke up in tears, but this time they were tears of release. Soon after, Ramon proposed. Magdalena was taken aback at first, but after thinking, she said yes. She felt she had suffered enough, and she deserved love and a real family. At their small ceremony at City Hall, only Anna, Natalia, and a couple of friends attended. Ramon's parents, who lived in Seville, were happy for their son, having heard about Magdalena. No one brought up her traumatic past. The atmosphere was light, joyful. When they were pronounced husband and wife, Magdalena felt tears of happiness stream down her face. Ramon held her hand and smiled. Life went on. Magdalena knew she had finally stepped into a new chapter of her destiny. She never stopped being thankful, to fate, or to her own intuition, for that one moment when she decided to switch glasses. One small action saved her life and exposed a vile conspiracy. Yes, she had endured pain, betrayal, legal battles, but she emerged stronger, wiser, and still capable of love. When she and Ramon returned from a short honeymoon in the Canary Islands, Magdalena stood in her newly renovated apartment and caught herself feeling something rare, tranquility. A calm, steady happiness untouched by horror or hate. The ominous question from her mother-in-law echoed in her mind. Eres feliz? This time, Magdalena thought. Yes. Now I am truly happy. And no one can take that from me.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.